Hello, world. My name is Leo, and today I want to talk about my thoughts and theories so far on Deltarune Chapter 4. This one was probably my favorite chapter out of all of them. It's not perfect, I do think there are some flaws, but almost everything, the pixel art, the music, the character moments, the fights, the establishing of real emotional stakes, it all comes together into something that makes for a really great time. Like I said in my Let's Play, this chapter had moments that I had been waiting for since the start of the game, and those moments felt both emotional and earned. However, out of everything, the thing that stuck with me the most was how Chapter 4 discussed the theme of stories. Between the prophecy, the old man, Susie's interactions with both of those things, etc., the commentary on storytelling truly hooked me. And if I'm being honest, this is the reason it took me a while to make this video. I have so many thoughts on this topic, but they all feel scattered, like one of those cork boards with the lines crisscrossing and connecting between each other. Despite having the singular topic of stories, I was having a hard time putting it all together in a way that felt cohesive. But after giving it plenty of thought, I think I finally have things organized enough to talk about it. My thoughts basically fall into three categories: how the chapter explores Susie's role in the story, the commentary that stories can change, and how the themes of Deltarune are going to shape the ending of the game. So let's dissect those one at a time, and let's start with Susie. I found Susie's role in Chapter 4 incredibly fascinating. Of course, Chris and Ralsei have their own moments as well, but Susie in particular played a massive role in the directions this chapter went. From her hangout with Noelle, to the dark world she creates, to her finding out the ending of the prophecy, which, by the way, marks the first time that Susie learns something important that the player does not. That moment not only serves as a central emotional twist in the story, but it also makes the player feel more in the dark than ever, making the player both attached to and isolated from the characters. But the thing that I want to talk about the most regarding Susie is her interactions with the old man, Gerson Boom, the author of Lord of the Hammer, which is based on the prophecy. Throughout the chapter, Gerson slowly teaches Susie how to believe in herself and her role as a hero. This all culminates in the optional boss fight of the chapter, where Susie has to prove she has what it takes to fight for herself and her story, both to Gerson and to herself. It's one of my favorite fights in the entire game, and it's entirely focused on the power of stories and who writes them. When the fight is over, Susie realizes that her favorite game, Super Dragon Blazers, is based on Lord of the Hammer, and is therefore also loosely based on the prophecy. Susie then asks which Super Dragon Blazers character she is, and Gerson replies with, "You are the dragon." This line in particular, while it might be just a throwaway line, really stuck out to me, and I want to explore it in greater depth to see what it says about Susie's character and predict where it could go. Now, while Super Dragon Blazers has been referenced multiple times over the course of Deltarune, we aren't given enough context to definitively know what it's about or what role the dragon plays. However, dragons in general are extremely common in literature throughout history, and if we use that as reference, some interesting themes and trends start to appear. In some stories, dragons can represent tradition and stagnation. They hoard treasure, or they guard a princess in a tower, and anyone who tries to take what they're guarding is torched. Or they're part of a ritual where a village has to give gifts or sacrifices to the dragon to keep it appeased, forever keeping that tradition going under the threat of destruction. Alternatively, dragons can be chaos incarnate, a force of nature that can destroy everything and anything in its path, small villages and massive kingdoms alike. In both of these scenarios, the dragon is the villain of the story, an obstacle for the hero to overcome, and an opportunity for the hero to prove their worth. In other stories, however, the dragon can be a force for good, usually acting as a wise mentor or a trained companion. They lend a hand to the hero, either by providing them with gifts or teachings, or by helping to destroy their enemies. Now, across all of these interpretations and iterations of dragons, whether they are a force for good or a force for evil, there is one commonality. The dragon is never the hero. They are always meant to act in service of enhancing the real hero, whether through aid or opposition, but they are never the one who saves the day in the end. So, with all of this in mind, what is Gerson saying when he tells Susie that she's the dragon? Well, it feels like Susie embodies a combination of a lot of these elements, and yet she also subverts them in some ways. She's obviously very chaotic and revels in breaking things, but when Gerson asks her how she would want her story to end, she says that if she could choose, she wouldn't have an ending because it's better if things go on forever. At face value, this seems like a bad thing, like keeping things stagnant. But in this moment, Susie is defiantly standing up to the idea that someone could write an ending to her story and impose it on her. In fact, this moment also ties into the themes of choice that I talked about all the way back in Chapter 1, with Susie using her agency to defy her inevitability. It's truly such a poetic moment, and it feels incredibly important to Susie's evolution as a character. She also helps Chris during all of their adventures, acting as their companion and providing both destruction and healing. She even says herself that Chris is the one who has the pen of hope, not her. But she's also directly cited as being a hero in the prophecy. Or is she? I know people pointed out that the picture in the prophecy and some of the wording regarding the girl might not necessarily match Susie, but I don't know if that matters all that much, because it's clear that Susie has fallen into that role, even if it's not necessarily meant for her, which would be another subversion of typical dragon tropes. When it comes specifically to Super Dragon Blazers, at the very least, it's clear that Susie sees the dragon as a badass character who plays a major role in the game's story. We also learn in this chapter that the game has a good route and an evil route, so it's possible the dragon could go either way. As for what this says about Susie going forward, it could also go either way. Typical literature would dictate that Susie is primarily here to help Chris become the hero they were meant to be. If Deltarune goes that route, I could see Susie being the one that's supposed to die in the prophecy, which would act as Chris's final motivation and catalyst to step into the hero role. However, we all know that Toby Fox likes to subvert expectations, so it could just as easily be the case that Susie will have to step up and take on the role of hero, and maybe even become the new player character at some point in the story. Regardless, I think it's extremely clear that Susie will be shaping the narrative in one way or another. The question is, will it be on her own terms? Or will the prophecy prove to be too infallible for even a dragon to handle? So, with my theorizing regarding Susie, you might have noticed that I didn't pick a definitive theory to go with. And I have a very simple reason for that. Picking something definitive just doesn't feel right. The narrative of Deltarune is unpredictable, and that's clearly by design. Not only is the story told in such a way to purposely obfuscate details from the player, and using Chris as a way to do it, but Gerson explicitly tells Chris and Ralsei that too much predictability can poison your story. And with Chapter 4 in particular, it feels like Toby used it as a way to express a lot of his storytelling philosophies. As a quick side tangent related to this, I can't help but wonder if the codes for the shelter are actually some kind of story misdirect. One of my biggest problems with Chapter 4 is that the whole setup for it is trying to find the codes for the shelter, yet even when we're looking for them in Noelle's home, it doesn't feel like the code matters all that much. Chris is actively trying to sabotage us, and Susie doesn't really seem all that bothered about finding the code at all, and she didn't even get a good look at it when she had the guitar. It's almost like a reverse MacGuffin, in a sense, where a MacGuffin is typically something that the characters in the story care about and it drives the plot forward, but here, it feels like the player has been made to care more about the codes than the characters do. And despite the plot seemingly being focused on them as the goal, it doesn't take long for the chapter to shift focus entirely to the prophecy. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like it made the pacing of this chapter feel really weird. But with this added context of unpredictability being so important as a storytelling element, the thought crossed my mind that maybe the codes aren't going to play as big of a role as what the story is trying to make them out to be, and we're gonna end up getting into the shelter through other means. But back on the topic of storytelling philosophies, unpredictability isn't the only thing that's talked about here in Chapter 4. After Gerson's fight with Susie, he says that stories can change and be retold. And that's a central theme of the chapter as a whole, the idea that stories are malleable and don't have to strictly adhere to any precedents that were set by the past, especially if another author is taking up the mantle. To me, this feels like a theme that hits close to home for Toby, and while I'm absolutely not claiming to know anything about him, I can't help but wonder if his experience writing Deltarune has had any influence on these themes. Chapter 1 came out in 2018, almost a decade ago, and Toby has been working on Deltarune as a concept for even longer than that. In that time, a lot has happened in terms of world events, some of them potentially life altering. Toby is almost certainly not the same person that he was when he started developing Deltarune. I know he said that he had a dream about the ending, and I could see that staying consistent, but who knows how everything leading up to that ending has evolved since the release of Chapter 1. In fact, we have proof that at least one aspect of the story has changed: the identity of Mike. Mike was originally brought up in Chapter 2 by Spamton, and people went wild with theories about who that could be. Well, in Chapter 4, Toby presents three different versions of Mike: a microphone, a cat, and a cowboy. And people in the comments let me know that those designs were all based on different theories the fans had about him. So, what was the original intention with Mike? Will Mike still be something else in future chapters? I have no idea. But whatever that intention was, Toby changed how Mike was presented based on things the fanbase said. And that's just the most clear-cut example. In this way, Deltarune almost feels collaborative, in a sense. The fanbase has so many interpretations of these characters, and so many ideas for where the story could go. These interpretations and ideas clearly have influence on the story in some way, and this, even more than the changes that come with time, reflects what Gerson says about how stories can change and be retold. Now, it's one thing to wonder if the story of Deltarune has changed, but another question that could be asked is, does it matter that Deltarune has changed? And to an extent, I don't think it does. While it would be really cool to learn what the original vision for Deltarune might have been, I think something that Toby has done really well has been to keep any and all changes consistent within the universe, and make sure the story continues to have a good flow. And heck, even if the ending itself ends up changing, I'm confident that whatever version of Deltarune we have when all is said and done is going to be, at the very least, a good story, and at the very most, an epic tale that people will be talking about for years to come. The themes of unpredictability and change aren't the only themes this chapter touches on. Anytime the old man comes up, he always has some wisdom to drop. Things like, there's always value in choosing your own path, even if it leads nowhere. And don't forget the past, but don't let it hold you back from your future. With this chapter clearly trying to say so much, it made me wonder, what is the ultimate moral of Deltarune going to be? Now, I know I've already talked about my predictions for the ending of the game in my Chapter 1 Thoughts video, and how those predictions stemmed from the themes of choice. But what is Deltarune ultimately trying to say about choice and stories and change? The way things are going now, it truly feels like these themes could go anywhere. For example, Susie's character feels extremely hopeful. The old man says that no matter what she turns out to be, she's going to be tremendous. She feels so much naive joy at the idea that she's meant to be a hero. If we follow those aspects, then the game would probably ultimately say that, no matter what, your choices do matter, and the odds can be overcome. You can't change everything, but you're never fully out of control. On the other side of the coin, we have Chris, who seems incredibly depressed, and who seems to be trying to sabotage both themselves and Susie against their will. They are just a puppet, and they don't really have control over anything. It's a very nihilistic way of interpreting these themes, and if we follow these aspects, then the game would probably say that you can't outrun fate, that there are always forces more powerful than you, and your choices are ultimately meaningless. Now, obviously, with both of these aspects being in focus, I don't think the game will end up focusing entirely on one or the other. Things aren't usually black and white like that. So I started thinking, are there any other games that tackle this combination of themes? It's all super existential, and I love existential games. So I tried to come up with a game that delivered a message that was both hopeful and nihilistic in equal measure. And then it hit me. There was such a game that did exactly that. And not only is it a game with a creator that Toby Fox has spoken with before, but it was a game that I had talked about in connection with Deltarune before. Heck, it's a game that I've talked about in connection with multiple games, because it's my favorite game of all time. NieR Automata. Truly one of the greatest existential stories of our generation, NieR Automata is about two androids, 2B and 9S, who are part of a war between androids created by humans and machines created by aliens. It touches on several different philosophies throughout its runtime and talks a lot about the meaning of life and finding meaning in existing when all meaning has seemingly been lost. And the ending of that game, it is, without exaggeration, my favorite ending of any game I've ever played. It's so unique and so beautifully delivers a final, defiant message of what the pursuit of meaning is and what matters. I really want to go more into it, and I'm sure some of you wouldn't care if I did, but I'm of the belief that this ending is so good, so profound, that it absolutely needs to be experienced for yourself, and I'd rather not risk spoiling that for anyone. Of course, I'm aware that choosing not to talk about the ending makes it really hard to connect it back to Deltarune and what I think Toby is ultimately going to say about all these themes. So I'll just say this. NieR Automata is ultimately a game about keeping hope in the face of overwhelming odds. It's a game about choosing to find meaning where there is none. It's a game that asks you if you will just roll over and accept your predetermined outcome and giving you the option of saying yes or no. This is what I think Deltarune will do as well. I believe we will reach an ending, and that ending won't be satisfying. The thing that Susie found that she won't let happen is going to happen, and there's nothing that can be done to stop it. Heck, we already know that there are still outside forces trying to make sure their story goes a certain way, as the speaker at the very end says that we're getting closer to their Deltarune. But like I said in the previous section, Deltarune feels like a collaborative project. The story of Deltarune doesn't just belong to one person. And so an ending will be presented, and then the game will ask the player if they will accept what happened. What will happen next will be up to us, and the one ending will be one that we choose. Or I could be completely wrong, and Toby will lean hard into the one ending and not give the player any agency at all. But the way this game talks about its themes is so similar to the way that NieR talks about its themes that I can't help but think that this game will end a similar way, with resounding hope in the face of overwhelming meaninglessness. And on that note, that will wrap it up for my thoughts and theories on Chapter 4. I apologize for taking so long to make this one. I had a lot of ideas but wasn't sure on the best way to organize them. For what it's worth, I'm glad I took that time because some of the best thoughts that I had and connections that I made came long after finishing the chapter. And I'm really proud of how this one ended up turning out. I also mean it when I say that I loved how this chapter talked about the theme of storytelling. Any game that allows me to get into a philosophical mindset and talk about what I think the game is trying to say, it's always something that I'm gonna love, and I'm so happy that I got to share this experience with you all. Please feel free to leave a comment with your own thoughts on what I've said, and while you're at it, let me know if you'd like to see me play NieR Automata on the channel. It'll probably happen at some point anyway, because I'd love to re-experience my favorite game of all time with you all, but knowing that other people would want to see it would just make me that much happier. Thanks again for being so wonderful, and for being so welcoming as I shared my journey through this game. I have some more Deltarune related things happening in the near future, but for now, this is the end of the video. And once those other things are done, I'll see you all for Chapter 5. Goodbye!